My father treated me like garbage for 21 years while worshiping my brother, but when a DNA test revealed my brother wasn't his biological son, I demanded he kick him out, and now I'm inheriting the entire family business my grandfather founded. I'm 21 years old. I work with my father in the family HVAC business that my grandfather founded like 30 years ago. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago basically blew up my family in a way I never imagined, and I'm still processing everything. The thing is, I was always the problem child, you know, the one who could never do anything right according to my father, while my brother Marcus, who's 23, was literally the perfect son who could do whatever he wanted, and dad would always defend him. I grew up thinking I just wasn't good enough, that there was something wrong with me, and I resigned myself to that for years until everything came crashing down in the most unexpected way possible. Let me backtrack a bit so you understand what our family dynamic was like. My dad, Robert, inherited the HVAC business from my grandfather and was always super strict with me, but incredibly permissive with Marcus. Like, if I got a B in school, it was the end of, to the world, but Marcus could fail a class and dad would say it didn't matter, that he'd catch up eventually. If I came home 10 minutes past curfew, I'd be grounded for a month, but Marcus would come home at 3 in the morning drunk and dad would just laugh and say boys will be boys. It was always like that, for as long as I can remember. My mom, Jennifer, never said anything. I mean, she was more neutral, but she didn't defend me when dad treated me differently either. And that hurt in a different way, because at least I expected her to see how unfair everything was. Marcus and I were never close for obvious reasons, and he was the favorite and he knew it, and I think part of him enjoyed rubbing it in my face that he could get away with everything. When I started working in the family business at 18, Dad would put me on the hardest jobs, the most complicated installations on roofs in the middle of summer with infernal heat, while Marcus, who started like a year before me, basically did paperwork in the air-conditioned office. It didn't matter that I worked twice as hard, or that clients always praised me. Dad would always find something to criticize about my work, but would praise even Marcus's smallest effort. What I didn't know at the time, what nobody knew except my grandfather apparently, was that this whole situation had a much deeper and more messed up reason than anyone could imagine. My grandfather died like 5 years ago, when I was 16, and he was always kinder to me than my own father, which seemed weird, but was also a relief to have at least someone in the family who didn't treat me like I was a burden. Turns out the old man had his suspicions about my mom and about the paternity of one of his grandsons, but he never said anything directly. He just made sure that his will and the trust he had established for the business specified clearly that everything would go only to his biological grandchildren. At the time, nobody paid much attention to that specification because everyone assumed both Marcus and I were Dad's biological sons. Things started falling apart like 8 months ago. My dad was cleaning the attic, looking for some old boxes of Grandpa's tools, when he found some of my mom's old diaries from years ago, like from when Marcus and I were kids. I don't know exactly what they said, because Dad never showed me the complete ones. But apparently Mom had written in quite a bit of detail about an affair she had for years with some guy who worked at I don't know what construction company. And this guy died like 12 years ago in a work accident. Dad went livid when he found that. Obviously, but what really destroyed him was doing the math on the dates and realizing that the affair coincided perfectly with Marcus's pregnancy and birth. The night Dad confronted Mom about the diaries was an absolute disaster. I was in my room and could hear the screaming from downstairs. Mom crying and saying it was a mistake. That she was confused at the time, that she was so sorry, and Dad yelling, how could she have done that to him, that his whole life was a lie. Marcus was also home and came down to see what was happening. And when Dad told him about the affair, I saw Marcus's face go completely pale. I think in that moment we all had the same thought, even though nobody said it out loud, right? The next day, Dad called his lawyer and also talked to someone about DNA tests. The thing is, Dad wanted answers. He needed to know for certain whether Marcus was his biological son or not. And, by extension, I think he also wanted to confirm that I was, although he never said it that way. I remember when he sat Marcus and me down in the living room and explained that we were going to take paternity tests, that he needed to be sure of everything before making any decisions about the future. Marcus got super defensive, saying it was ridiculous, that obviously he was his son, How could he even think to doubt it? I stayed quiet, because honestly, a part of me, a very dark part that had been repressed for years, thought that maybe, just maybe, this would explain why Dad always treated me differently. The 2 weeks it took for the results were the most tense of my life. Mom spent her time locked in her room crying. Dad barely spoke to us and would leave early for work and come back late. And Marcus was super nervous, although he tried to hide it. I was in a weird state where I didn't know if I hoped the results would confirm we were both his sons, so everything could go back to normal, or if I secretly wanted it confirmed that Marcus wasn't, because that would mean all those years of favoritism and mistreatment toward me made no logical sense, and that I wasn't the problem. When the results came in, Dad called us all to the living room again. He opened the envelope with trembling hands and read in silence for what seemed like hours, but was probably like 30 seconds. Then he looked at Marcus with an expression I'll never forget, a mix of pain, disappointment, and something that looked like revulsion, and told him, "You're not my biological son." Marcus froze, literally turned white as a sheet, and started stuttering that it couldn't be true, that there had to be an error with the test. Mom got up from the couch and ran toward Marcus, trying to hug him, but he pushed her away and yelled at her that this was her fault, that she had ruined his life. Then Dad looked at me and said, "You are my son," with a voice that sounded almost surprised, like he had also been mentally preparing himself for the possibility that neither of us was his. I don't know what I was supposed to feel in that moment. Relief? Happiness? Guilt? I felt a weird mix of all of it. But what I felt most was a kind of bitter vindication, because I finally had an explanation for why my childhood was so miserable. Grandpa had known, or at least suspected it. That's why he was always more affectionate with me. That's why his will specified biological grandchildren. And that's why Dad unconsciously always favored Marcus, probably trying to compensate or deny his own doubts about paternity. The next part is where I admit that maybe I wasn't the best person. But after 21 years of being treated like trash, while Marcus was adored for absolutely everything, something in me broke in a good way. Or in a bad way, depending on how you see it. I looked at Dad and said, "Since Marcus isn't your biological son, you're going to kick him out of the house, right?" Dad looked at me confused and I said, "It's what you would have done to me if the results had been reversed. We all know it's true. So now that we know he's not your son, he has to go." Mom looked at me horrified and told me how could I be so cruel, and I told her it wasn't cruelty, it was justice. That for years, she allowed Dad to treat me like I didn't matter and never said anything. So now that the situation was reversed, the rules should be the same. Dad stayed quiet for a long moment, and I could see on his face that he was processing everything, probably realizing that I was right, that if I had been the one who wasn't biologically his, he would have kicked me out without thinking twice. Finally, he told Marcus that he needed to pack his things and find another place to stay, that he needed space to think about everything. Marcus went hysterical, screaming that he'd been his son for 23 years, that a piece of paper couldn't change that I was manipulating the situation. I yelled back at him that he had enjoyed 23 years of being the favorite, of having everything served on a silver platter while I was treated like a second-class citizen, and that now that the truth came out, he had to face the consequences just like I would have had to face them. Marcus packed his things that same night. Well, Dad basically gave him like 3 hours to get the essentials and told him he could come back for the rest later when things calmed down. He went to stay with a friend, and I remember watching him load his suitcases into the car while crying, and Mom was also crying at the door, asking him for forgiveness over and over. I stayed in my room watching everything from the window, and I'm not going to lie, I felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt. Because on one hand, things were finally fair, but on the other hand, I had just destroyed the life of someone I shared my entire childhood with, even though we were never really close. Things got worse like 2 days later, when Marcus called my cell phone super agitated. He told me that if I didn't convince Dad to let him come back to the house, he was going to tell Dad something that Mom had confessed to Marcus years ago in a moment of weakness, that the guy she had the affair with wasn't the only one, that there had been other men during her marriage, and that if Dad found out about that, the divorce would probably be even uglier and Mom wouldn't get anything. I told him I didn't give a damn what he did, that if he wanted to sink the ship completely, it was his decision, but that I wasn't going to help him after years of watching how they treated me differently. I hung up the phone and sat there thinking about how twisted the whole situation was. Marcus made good on his threat. Like 3 days later, Dad came home from work with a face of fury I'd never seen on him. Apparently, Marcus had gone to the office and told him everything about Mom's other affairs, with names and dates that Mom had confided in him. Dad confronted Mom that night and she couldn't deny it, admitted that yes, there had been other men during the years, that she was unhappy in the marriage but was afraid to leave, that she was so sorry. Dad told her he didn't want to hear any more lies, that the next day he was going to call his lawyer to start divorce proceedings, and that as far as he was concerned, she could leave the house right then and there. Mom started packing her things the next day. She called her sister, my Aunt Rachel, and arranged to go stay with her at her apartment like 2 hours from here. It was surreal watching her put her clothes and things into suitcases, the entire family life, I knew literally disintegrating before my eyes. She tried to talk to me before leaving, told me she understood, if I hated her, that she had made terrible mistakes, that she never wanted things to end like this. I told her I didn't hate her, but I couldn't forgive her yet either, that I needed time to process everything. She left that afternoon and the house was incredibly empty and quiet, just Dad and me, who had basically been enemies my entire life. Like a week after Mom left, Marcus sent me a long text message, like a complete essay, saying he had a plan to fix everything, that if we worked together we could get Dad to forgive Mom and the family could reunite. He said that at the end of the day we were all family regardless of biology, and that we needed to get through this together. Honestly, it seemed super delusional to me, because I didn't understand how he thought Dad was going to forgive decades of lies and betrayal, or how he expected me to help him after everything. I responded with a simple, no thanks, and he answered that I was a selfish person who was enjoying the destruction of the family. I blocked his number after that because I didn't have the energy for his mind games. The weirdest part of all this was what happened like a month after Mom left. Dad knocked on my bedroom door one night, around 10, and asked if we could talk. We sat in the living room, him with a beer in his hand that was like the fourth or fifth of the night, and he told me something I never thought I'd hear from him. He said, "I'm sorry for treating you the way I did all these years." And he started crying, like this 50-something-year-old man who had always been super tough and stoic, crying in front of me. He said that looking back, he realized that he had unconsciously always treated Marcus better because deep down he had doubts about his paternity and was overcompensating, and that I paid the price for his insecurities and cowardice. I sat there not knowing what to say, because on one hand I wanted to yell at him that his apology didn't erase 21 years of feeling inferior, but on the other hand, I could see he was genuinely destroyed by everything that had happened. I told him I appreciated the apology, but we needed time to build a real relationship, that we couldn't just pretend everything was fine overnight. He nodded and told me he understood, that he was willing to make the necessary effort, and that legally the business was mine now because of Grandpa's trust. That when he retired, I was going to inherit everything, because I was the only biological grandson. That hit me like a bucket of cold water, because I hadn't even thought about the financial implications of all this. But there it was. The business that Grandpa built and Dad expanded would eventually be mine, and Marcus would have nothing. Now, like 3 months after all that disaster, the situation is weird but somewhat stable, I guess. Mom is still living with my aunt. The divorce is in process, and it looks ugly because Dad is fighting for basically everything, and she's probably not going to get much considering all the evidence of infidelity. Marcus got a job at a construction company in another city, and as far as I know, he's living alone in a small apartment. We haven't spoken since I blocked his number. Dad and I are working on our relationship. It's awkward and clumsy, but at least now he treats me with something resembling respect. He's teaching me more about the administrative side of the business, and we talk about future plans. Last week, I ran into one of Marcus's friends at the supermarket, and he told me that Marcus hates me, that he talks about me like I destroyed the family on purpose, as if I had anything to do with the decisions Mom made decades ago. That made me feel weird because technically I did push to have him kicked out of the house, but at the same time, wasn't that exactly what they would have done to me? I don't know. Maybe I went too far. Maybe I should have been more compassionate, but after a lifetime of being the unwanted son, something inside me needed them to know what it felt like to be on the other side. What keeps me up at night the most is thinking about my grandfather. If he really knew or suspected all this, if that's why he was always more affectionate with me, if he took all that information to the grave without saying anything because he wanted to protect me, or because he didn't want to cause exactly the kind of family explosion that ended up happening anyway. Sometimes I wonder what things would be like if we had never found those diaries, if we had kept living in ignorance, with Marcus as the favorite son and me as the second choice. I'd probably be happier in a certain sense, but I'd also still be feeling like something was fundamentally wrong without understanding why. I guess this is my life now. Working with a father who's trying to make up for 2 decades of mistreatment, being the sole heir to a family business while my ex-brother hates me from a distance, and processing the fact that my mother destroyed our family with her selfish decisions. I don't know if things are ever going to feel normal again, or if this new broken version of normal is all we're going to have. But at least now I know the truth. And there's something about that that feels like closure, even if it's a bitter and painful closure.